My mother always had this plant in her collection. She would let this plant either climb up a moss pole, or she would just let this plant fall towards gravity. Sometimes she would also let this plant climb up a rope which would be tied to nails on the wall. And now that I look back, I always remember this plant as being this lush green vine, and I have a better understanding on why not just my mom, but a lot of plant lovers really enjoy having this plant in their home. Hello everyone, my name is Varsha, and today I'm going to be talking about my childhood plant and one of the most common house plants, the Epipremnum Aureum, or what we call as money plant here in India. The Epipremnum Aureum is the scientific name for this plant, and it has a lot of names as well. The most popular name for this plant is Golden Pothos, and some other names include Devil's Ivy, and that is because it's impossible to kill this plant even when you place it in the dark. It is also called Solomon Islands ivy, Ceylon creeper, taro vine, ivy arum, devil's claw ivy, to name a few. Now, this plant belongs to the Araceae family, and when you talk about the origins of this plant, for a very long time, nobody knew from where this plant originated from. That is because this plant was found growing in many of the tropical and subtropical countries. And it was later found out that this plant originated from Moorea, which is a volcanic island in French Polynesia. Due to its invasive nature, this plant is found growing in many parts of the world, and it has been naturalized as well in many of the tropical and subtropical countries. Now, there are so many different varieties of the pothos, for example, the Enjoy, the Manjula, Marble Queen, and so on. But personally, I think this variety, or the Golden Pothos, is one plant that you will find in any nursery in the world. So the leaves of a Golden Pothos are usually heart-shaped, and they're quite thick and waxy. The new leaves which emerges from this plant usually has a gloss or a shine on it, and you will also notice that the leaves of this plant have these blotches of yellow or white to green variegation, which varies from leaf to leaf. Now, when you look at the stem of this plant, you will notice that the stem has these aerial roots as well as a petiole attached to it, which in turn is attached to a leaf blade. Now, what's interesting about the petiole is that they have these grooves in them, where I've always found one of the most common houseplant pests in my home, the mealybugs, hiding in it. Now, what's interesting about the Golden Pothos is that the ones that we usually bring from the nursery are all juvenile plants, and that is because the leaves are all small. They are quite small in size. And when this plant is growing outdoors, it usually attaches itself to a supporting structure like a tree. And depending on the height of the tree, the plant uses its aerial roots, which come out from the node as well as the internode, to latch onto the support, climbing higher and higher. Now, as a plant gets taller, it also increases the size of the leaves, ranging from about 2.5 feet, which is roughly half the size of a normal adult, to about 6 feet. The stem also increases in size, in diameter. So the Golden Pothos is a versatile plant. It can grow outdoors as well as indoors. So for this video, I thought it would be interesting to show how this plant actually grows in both these environments. And I contacted 2 of my friends to share pictures as well as videos of how their plant is doing. The Golden Pothos in my home is growing indoors and in different locations. Now, this plant is a really great plant to have indoors, and it is also touted to be one of the best plants for a beginner. And the main reason for that is light. This plant is not really picky about its light requirement. When you place this plant in a low light area, You will notice that the plant continues its growth, but it may not be rapid. You will also notice that the leaves loses its variegation along the way. Now, when you place this plant in a bright spot or a medium bright spot with indirect light, meaning without any sunlight, or even if this plant gets early morning sunlight, this plant continues its growth rather rapidly. And you will also notice that the plant maintains its famous variegation. Now, when it comes to sunlight, especially harsh sunlight, this plant does not like it. The leaves of the plant gets burnt, and overall the plant looks really dull, and it's very difficult to bring this plant back to its former self. So you will have to wait for a very long time. So it's best not to expose this plant to any kind of sunlight unless it's early morning sunlight, from my experience. Now, this plant is really not picky when it comes to its water requirement. Now, when I used to bring plants indoors initially, and when I used to take care of them, I would water them after observing the soil. I would see if the soil is dry. I would stick my finger into the soil to see if the top half of the soil is dry. Now, what happened eventually is I ended up killing a lot of plants in the process, and after that I started observing a lot of my plants to see if they really need water or not. Now, with the Golden Pothos, I usually let this plant's soil dry out. Now, I let it dry to a state of almost complete dryness. And the way this plant tells me that it needs water is by looking dull. The leaves look really dull, and it's very easy to find out if this plant requires water. The leaves also starts curling up as a sign of water requirement. So when I water this plant, I usually start off by washing the leaves first. And the reason for that is, since the plant is indoors, a lot of dust gets accumulated on the leaves. I also have, the windows in my home open, and again, all the dust from outside also enters into the house and again deposits on the leaves. So by washing the leaves first helps me to first remove any kind of dust on them. Now, any kind of pest, for example, like a mealybug in this plant's case, that also gets removed or washed off in the process. So it's like a preventive measure to keep some of the houseplant pests at bay, for me at least. So after I'm done with that, I usually like to water the soil thoroughly. I let the water drain out completely for about 30 minutes to an hour so that there are no residues in the pot. Only then do I actually bring this plant back to its spot. To ensure that the water does not get retained in the soil, I have used a well-draining mix. Now, to the garden soil, which I had bought from my local nursery, I've added cocoa chips, I've added cocoa peat, I've added charcoal, as well as vermicompost and sand and perlite. So the plant seems to be doing pretty well growing in this medium. The Golden Pothos is a tropical plant and it enjoys warm temperatures. Now, this plant likes a temperature between 65 degrees Fahrenheit to about 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if there's a drop in temperature, let's say about 50 degrees Fahrenheit or below that, this plant will get severely damaged. But the good thing about this plant is it really adapts well to the temperatures of our home, which is a room temperature. Now, since this plant is again a tropical plant, it enjoys high humidity. Now, the good thing about this plant again is that it really adapts well to the humidity in my home. Now, in all the months that this plant has been here, I've never misted it. But now, since it's quite cold in my city, and just like how my skin, gets really dry and how I have to moisturize my skin, I do realize that this plant also requires to be hydrated. So I miss this plant quite often throughout the day, and that is mainly because I'm indoors, I don't go out, and I don't have to go to an office to work as well. So I do miss this plant a couple of times in the day, in addition to keeping this plant, along with other plants. So I have this grouped with a lot of other plants. Now, if you live in a city where the humidity levels are really low, and if you're someone who cannot miss the plants as often as I do, you can always place this plant on a pebble tray, or you can group the plants together, or you can also invest in a humidifier for your plant. Now, it's a common knowledge that you should fertilize your plants only during the growing season. Now, in the case of my Golden Pothos, I have it indoors and it is protected from the cold outside. And that is the reason I have seen a lot of growth on this plant, irrespective of the season. Now, I used to fertilize this plant once a month, and my go-to fertilizer has always been an organic one, like vermicompost. Now, since it's quite cold, I have reduced the strength of the fertilizer to a quarter, and that is because this plant has been pushing out new growth, and a little bit of nutrients wouldn't hurt. Now, the only pests that I've encountered with the Golden Pothos are mealybugs. The mealybugs usually attack the new leaves on this plant. Sometimes they also end up hiding in the grooves of the petioles, and you can also find them on the roots and sometimes even under the base of the pot. So the way I try to eradicate the mealybugs, of course, the first method is just by washing the leaves thoroughly when you water the plant. Now, even after washing the leaves thoroughly, this plant still manages to somehow attract mealybugs, and that is because this plant is grouped with a lot of other plants. And besides washing the leaves, what I tend to do is I use a mild soap solution to remove the mealybugs. And if there is a severe infestation, something which I have not encountered with this plant, I tend to isolate the plant and then give it an organic neem oil treatment. Now, the Golden Pothos is a plant that can be easily propagated. Now, in order to propagate this plant, you have to make a cut right below the node, that is right here. You can place these cuttings in water so that you can watch the roots develop in water, or you can place them directly in soil. Now, after the roots have developed well in water, and when it's time to transplant them, it's always good to place multiple cuttings of the plant in soil, and that is because you will end up having a bushy plant. You can place a moss pole to let this plant climb up, or you can just let the plant grow as it is. Now, according to the American Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, this plant is toxic to cats and dogs. If this plant is ingested, the symptoms would vary from oral irritation, pain and swelling of the mouth, as well as vomiting and difficulty in swallowing due to the presence of raphides. This plant is also mildly toxic to humans due to the presence of calcium oxalate crystals. And in humans, what you would notice is an immediate burning sensation of the mouth, as well as swelling in the lips and other parts of the mouth. Now, continuous exposure to the sap of this plant can result in contact dermatitis as well as eye irritation. Now, if you have small children as well as pets like cats or dogs in your home, it's best to keep this plant away from them. You can have this plant placed up really high where they do not have any access to them, like maybe placing it on a bookshelf, or you can let this plant hang down from a hanging basket. With this, we have come to the end of our video. Now, if you have liked this video, the information that I have shared about the Golden Pothos, please click on the like button. You can also click on the subscribe button if you haven't subscribed to my channel. You can also hit the bell's icon to get notifications on new plant videos. So before I end, I want to thank my friends Yuva and Manjula for sharing pictures of their Golden Pothos from their home with me so that I can share it with all of you. Thank you so much everyone for staying and watching this video with me. I hope to see you in my next plant video. Bye-bye.